Is that good for everyone? All right, so Etan laid this out that this is all about disruption, right? And you guys have already drank the Kool-Aid. We all understand that verified credentials are changing the way people connect with work. We've all accepted that these wallets are going to come into the mainstream, and we're moving our way through that. So the intent here today is not to talk specifically about aspects of what you're doing with Velocity, but maybe to push our thinking a little bit further forward than anyone is going today. And what are the next things that we need to think about? What can you be thinking about as it comes to product development? What is the future of work going to look like? What are some of the different perspectives that are going to come into play? So we've assembled an interesting little team here today that are going to give you some perspectives from different ends. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we'll start with the lady. So Elizabeth, do you want to start us out?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Elizebeth Varghese and I work at IBM. I lead IBM's HR transformation services globally in the Americas. And I am a blockchain and digital wallet passionate enthusiast. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Laura and Etan, old friends, old and dear friends.
Very good. Nelly.
Hello, my name is Nelly Tacheva. My background is in software engineering, data and leadership, and we are building the future workspace, which is in the Metaverse. So problems which we're tackling is first, the future of work is remote or hybrid, and second, we would like to increase the engagement of employees and their efficiency. So we're building a product, Tangra, the future office.
Excellent. Jeff?
I think you can hear me. I'm Jeff Schwartz. If I only have one thing on my badge, I feel like I'm not telling the story anymore. So right now I'm the Vice President of Insights and Impact at a startup called Float. Actually, Franco Golden sitting back there. He's on our team, one of the members of our strategy team. We're pioneers in the talent marketplace space. And last 2 weeks ago, we just did our D series funding and raised $90 million. So we're very excited. I think that's representative of what's happening in this space. Also, I'm a professor at Columbia Business School. I actually taught the first Future of Work course here at Cornell Tech, but it was virtual because it was in the spring of 2020, I think, or 2021. I can't remember anymore, 2020. And I also wrote a book called Work Instruction on this. But relevant to this area, I've been leading research with Deloitte, where I'm a retired partner last year, with NYC Stone Management Review, where we've been looking at the evolution of talent markets, what we're calling workforce ecosystems. We just issued a report on this that came out a couple of months ago. We have a book coming out from MIT Press early next year, also looking at the whole question of workforce ecosystems. That's what we've been talking about. Long introduction, but I think there's a lot of moving parts that are very relevant.
Excellent, thanks. Dan.
Very good. And my name is Dan Beck. I'm the co-founder and COO of a startup named Utmost. We nominally are a more modern version of software focused on non-employed labor, extended workforce. So think of us as a modern competitor to folks like SAP Fieldglass and vendor management space, but we think there's a much broader market there. I feel like it's great that I'm sitting next to Jeff, so I didn't have to stalk you on the Upper West Side and reading your books and reading your research. And I am grateful to be here because we feel like we got. Thank you. I started the business not to be a better version of Fieldglass. We think that's going to be easy. We started the business because, as Drew said in his opening remarks, upwards of half of the global working population are now non-employee. And be it workforce ecosystems, workforce orchestration, that's the kind of software we built for this future of work that comes right through credentials. It's in the marketing efficiency. So grateful to be here today. Nice to meet you.
Great. So I want to start with a quote that is in the introduction of the report that Jeff is referencing, because we've said that, I think it was 40% in developing countries and 23% in developed countries are using external workforce. I got to tell you, it's a much bigger number when we look at things. I think we're vastly underestimating things. So if you look at the introduction of the report Jeff's referenced, and I'm sure we can make the URL and the full report available to everyone, but it speaks from Jerome Wells, the Executive Vice President of HR at Unilever. And they estimate that their outer core, so they have 150,000 people in their workforce. So 150,000 worldwide employees of Unilever inside the organization. But Jaron estimates that the outer core of Unilever's workforce, people, third parties, and agencies, represents 3 million people. Wow. Pause and think about that. So when they're doing workforce planning, and they're trying to think about how they're going to execute work, get things done, and they're focusing on the 150,000 and how they do that, how small of a view do they have? And when you can start exploring what the 3 million can do for you as an organization, your perspective changes radically. So Jeff, take us through some of the findings in this ecosystem report, and it's about orchestrating the ecosystem. It isn't the first report, it's kind of the third in the series right now.
So it's so let me sort of two points to sort of frame this discussion. One, and I'll go into the report in a second, there's a great podcast, I'm a podcast junkie. My guess is there's a few podcast junkies in this audience, from the Center on Longevity at Stanford University. It's a great podcast. You should listen to it. And their first season was about century-long lives, building up the work of Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott on your life. And this year they did a season on the 50-year or 60-year career. But they did one episode that I think captures this from the employee perspective, the worker perspective. And it was called the 25-job career. Right? What does it mean when workers have, and our kids, anybody who's born in this century, right, who's 21 or 22 years old today, can expect some of them, many of them, to live to be 100. They will have this 60-year career. They will have a 25-job career. And yet everything we have, as we know, was not built for a 25-job career. It was built for a 1 or 2 or 3-job career, largely in the same organization. The other reframing, and I think this is where it gets very, very interesting, we get to decide as business leaders and as educators and policymakers and entrepreneurs how we frame the question. Do we frame the question, as Jaron Wells, who is a good friend of ours, and they're one of the lead, and was one of the first co-design partners of the talent marketplace with us at Deloitte. Do we think about an employee life cycle that is stable and static, that goes back to literally we talked about this in my book, that goes back to the idea that you work for a company for 35 years and we give you a gold watch, which according to my research is something that PepsiCo started in the 1930s. It's a brilliant idea, but it's probably a little bit outdated. What mental model do we have as both individuals and as organizations for what careers look like? Right? And we are in the middle of that reframing. And that's really where we're coming from when we started looking at talent marketplaces and workforce ecosystems. Right? Which is, are we looking at this, and it's the example of Unilever or any of the companies that we're talking about, most companies aren't even looking at their enterprise workforce base as an integrated marketplace. Right? When you work for an organization, one of the biggest challenges that we see, again, not from the worker perspective, but from the business leader perspective, is business leaders think, oh, you work for me. You're in my division. You're in my group. You're on my team. You want to go work for somebody else, right? No way.
Is Deloitte hiring?
Deloitte is hiring everywhere.
You just landed a big D.
No, but what's interesting about it is it's easier, and this is very frustrating for a lot of organizations, it's easier to find a job and move outside your company than inside your company. But this would drive Ronald Case, who won a Nobel Prize in economics in the 1930s for the nature of the firm, crazy, because effectively internal labor markets are worse than external labor markets, which is the opposite of the way it should be. So there's an opportunity for what we're talking about in terms of internal mobility as well as the extended enterprise mobility. The point is, and this is sort of one of the main observations of our research, almost nothing that we are doing around workforce management is built around the nature of careers today and the way people are moving and the way they move both in organizations and across organizations. So if I were to summarize our research that we did with MIT and Deloitte, it's that we recognize that the workforce is mobile, is going to have multi-chapter careers, is going to be working in the ecosystem way, but we're not set up to do that. I'll make one other quick observation. I was very fortunate about a year and a half ago, a conversation with Tom Friedman, the columnist for the New York Times, and Tom asked the kind of question that Tom would ask, which is, so Jeff, where are we in the history of the future of work? It's a really good question, and I'm looking at George and others here. We're at a different stage of the future of work today than we were 4 or 5 years ago. Right? In the last decade, everything we did in the future of work, in some sense, was an experiment. It was a pilot. We were trying out remote work. We were trying out how to work with gig workers and open talent. We didn't even know what open talent was in 2007. I don't think we did. I think it's something that really came up in the last decade. We began to really think more deeply about not only robotics in the workforce, but also software and AI in the workforce. But it's 2022, and everything we're doing today is about speed and scale. It's not about experimentation. Right? And I think this is one of the 3 key framings. Framing 1, mobility, the 25-job career. Framing 2, not the employee life cycle, but the workforce ecosystem, or some version of it. Internal markets and external markets, as we titled the report, working across and beyond organizational boundaries. And number 3 is what we are doing, whoever we are at this future of work landscape. Are we in a pilot experimental phase, which is always good, or are we really thinking about speed and scale, which is probably where the big benefits are going to be coming up. So those are just a couple of comments.
That's fun. So as someone who spent 27 years with one job inside one organization and is now working 4 jobs simultaneously, I also understand that this idea of the 25-job career doesn't mean sequential jobs either. Big shift as we go there. And as a housekeeping piece, I've been asked to make sure we all speak into mics so that the recording can come through. But Elizabeth, I wanted to turn to you. You've got a fun book, Blockchain Reactions, The Future of How We Live and Work. And what struck me as I went through it is this idea of our behavior as human beings and what we do as consumers in our life influences everything that goes on, yet our working life is certainly not caught up. Things are not as easy. So talk to us a little bit about how you see things evolving and how our human life and our work life are going to start merging in different ways.
Sure. So first is, I'm glad you called the book fun, because for most people who are not blockchain enthusiasts, their heads start to spin when you think about, as you know, right, blockchain and people and digital identity. So the goal of my writing the book was to actually make it consumable and fun for the audience. So I'm glad that worked out. But I think that the big piece of what I've observed, as my work with IBM and the research we've been doing, and the fact that IBM works with the Hyperledger, we're building Hyperledger, right, in collaboration with the other entities. But the big piece around why this is so important, about 5 years ago when I started talking about the applications of blockchain in the world of talent, people thought I was crazy. They literally thought I was crazy. So I was at events speaking about this, getting kind of shafted to the small speaking slots, conflicting with other things I write about that in the book. But the whole point was people didn't quite understand that this is technology that has the ability to do what qualifies innovation, right? So I think where we are today is we've seen that shift and that cognizance of this is great technology, but it's also only as good as we use it for our benefit. So I think we're at that kind of tipping point where we understand what blockchain can do for us. Among a core of people, semi-evangelists like us, writing books, singing songs, writing poetry about blockchain. We sent out to the far reaches of the universe, the James Webb telescope. But a couple of big shifts that I'm definitely seeing. Right, we talk about 3 million people in the workforce. I'm talking about 9 billion So our goal with what we do with blockchain and talent really needs to be to think about the entire global economy. 68% of the population in Asia, 86% of the population in Africa are in the informal economy. So in Asia, there are about 4.7 billion people. So if you take 68% of that, it's about 3 billion people. In Africa, of the 1.4 billion, which is what we have today, 86% are in the informal economy. So we're essentially talking about 4 billion people who do not participate in our global economy. They are foraging, they're doing subsistence agriculture. I grew up in India, so when I see a few faces, folks you might know, there's a large swaths of our global economy, our people, our community that are being left behind. And what blockchain can really do is provide that platform that everybody can participate in the global economy. Because what we're seeing here, so there's kind of different trends, right? So obviously there's that aspect of the size of the global economy. The second part of it is the big shift that IBM, Deloitte, we've all been talking about the disaggregation of work. Henry Ford started it, right? The disaggregation of work into skills. But I think we're at a point where we are able to disaggregate work into skills. You don't have to go to Harvard to be Bill Gates. You don't need a college degree to be the best coder or the hacker. IBM recognizes it. 40% of our workforce in some locations do not have college degrees. We don't need them to. JP Morgan recognized that. I mean, they used to hire over from the Ivy Leagues in their trading field. Now, if you take a test and you pass it, if you have a college degree from any college, you can join their trading field, right? So we've kind of made those shifts to say skills are more important than these big, complex job descriptions. So that's kind of like the second shift, right? So the first is this massive global population we need to tap into. The second is the fact that you can disaggregate skills, jobs into skills, and validate that with the work that Warren and all of us are doing. And when you bring that together with what blockchain can provide, that is when the magic will happen. However, if we restrict that to the formal economy, to the developed world, right, to the top of the pyramid, we're not going to get there. So, what I write about in the book is really about expanding our aperture to really be inclusive, not just in the ethnocentric way we think about, from all the diversity quotients, but really purely from a true inclusion perspective. How do we bring everybody along? How do we capture the best coder, no matter where they sit, sub-Saharan Africa, a small village in India, how do we access them to build the world that we want? So that's kind of how we're seeing some of this evolve, and we want a big, hopefully, fun world to play going forward.
That's great. I guess what I'd add into it, when you talk about the informal economy, our work with the World Employment Confederation spends a lot of time with the labor ministers in 50 of the economies around the world. And you see the Indian market, where 85% is still part of the informal economy, that they're starting to add in the platform economy and recognizing that capturing that marketplace in a digital way gives opportunity, one, for the individual. It certainly gives a tax opportunity to the Indian government because they can actually see where people are, what they're doing, and they can start learning as well. So there's an aspect of responsibility we all have as well to talk to governments about what we can do to help the government provide more value to their people, unleash the potential of those individuals along the way. All right, so we said fun. So Nelly, take us into the metaverse. Talk to us about what this workplace might look like as we go forward.
Thank you, John. First, the shift from a workplace to a workspace is something which I would like to touch upon. So a little bit going back up until the 1700s, we've been working from home basically. The home, the farm, whatever it were. And during the Industrial Revolution is when we started gathering into the same factory, the same space for basically using all the resources and machines in that building. Now, in the 20th century is when we had a little bit of a move to the cubicles, and the latest office looked mostly like a home. It was inspired by home with regards to furniture and counters, etc. And then the pandemic hit. So what we all did, we moved back to working from home. And there is no doubt that this is here to stay. The way we work has changed for good. Maybe some people are going back to the office 5 days a week. That won't be the case. That won't be the case for various reasons, which we are all aware of. So where this metaverse comes into place? We tried many tools, Zoom and Teams, you name them. They were never intended for a totally remote workforce. And we struggled through Zooms and the kinds, and we desperately need something new. Why we need it? Because first, we will be working remotely or in some sort of hybrid mode, and that's a given already. Two, we are realizing how inefficiency has crept up just because we've been utilizing so many applications. Actually, the research shows that knowledge workers spend 60% of their time on work, about work. So this is the second problem we need to tackle. We need to solve the inefficiency in the workplace. And three, only about 1/3 of the employees are engaged at work. So these all could be solved in the metaverse. The metaverse, the way we imagine it right now, a space, a workspace for us to go, to be together, to collaborate, to communicate, of course, and to do that in an immersive way, to do that in a much better way, because it's not only us showing our faces on Zoom, it's not only us emailing each other. We can actually get into that 3D model and actually see and touch and dissect an animal. We can do so much in the metaverse. Of course, the engagement level is much higher. It has been proven by a number of studies. Actually, medical training done via VR technology showed a retention of 80% 1 year later, compared to 20% using the regular traditional methods 1 week later. So we need that technology to improve our collaboration, our work together, our training at work, learning new skills, and at the same time, I'm telling you, it's so much fun. It's a beautiful space.
Well, as we hear skills and the evolving skills, if the half-life of skills are shifting and our need to learn and adapt is growing at that kind of a pace, it certainly changes the methods that we learn and how we need to think about things. So Dan, I want to come back maybe a little bit to this point of this extended workforce that's there. I was fascinated as I got to know how you guys launched into the market, seeing a 94% blind spot in the way things were done. I feel like that's a lot when you hear that 150,000 versus the 3 million that we heard in the workforce at Unilever. Talk to us a little bit about how enterprises are starting to think differently about their broader workforce.
Yeah, we just saw this pattern. I'll tell you the kind of conversations I'm having. We'll have a conversation say, we've got 2,500 contractors in 12 countries. Can you handle that population? Can utmost scale to that population? We say yes, absolutely. We're built for your enterprise scale. And then fast forward 9 months, they're in production with 27,000 in 100 countries. Like, how did you have that's a 15x blind spot, right? What about those other, did you hear, like the numbers I didn't say were incorrect. What about those other 24,500 people working for your brand in those other 88 countries? And so it's just mind-numbing what we're seeing out there, just in practice. I was only half joking. I feel like I'm stalking Jeff's research because we're the practitioners building a solution to live into this future work. And what you're seeing logically as the next step there is companies are saying, well, okay, if we've got 27,000 non-employees doing things for us, what are they doing? Right? And is that the right thing? And do we have the right mix? And the language it's just using is language we're able to kind of bring to these clients. They say, oh, it's about orchestrating the workforce ecosystem. And it's about understanding who's in that ecosystem. And the thing I particularly like about Velocity is it is about the talent. You can have this concept of agency over your data, agency over your career. And so that's what we're about. And I think that's the pattern we're seeing. And increasingly companies are coming around to the idea that this is good for their business. It's not this sort of paternalistic, oh, once you leave my brand, you no longer matter to me. Because you might come back as an alumni and do some valuable work, or you might be on a path to retirement. And you want to work 20 hours a week, you want some flexibility, and you're super valuable to that brand. Or you might have 4 jobs like John. So, I think this is a really exciting time. I think we're seeing I spent 10 years of my career at Workday, a big HCM player. I didn't know what to stand up for when started. We're kind of in the HR space, we're in the workforce space, but it's not human capital management. We focus on the extended workforce at Utmost, but we spend billions of dollars and massive amounts of energy around one relationship, employee-employer. We have customers with 9 different relationships with their talent. I mean, it's all the things you'd expect. It's contractor, it's contingent worker, it's outsourced relationship, but then it's a joint venture in India. And it's the firm they just acquired, and they're spitting that out in a different way. It's non-billable resources that they then consult with differently. How do you think about how you orchestrate that ecosystem? That is fun, and I think it's really exciting. I think Velocity and this principle of worker agency, worker ownership over their data, like we're living into that. I think companies are starting to think that way instead of this more paternalistic. I own you, and if I don't own you, then you leave, right? Because you're dead to me. And so that's part of what I see the future is going to be. This kind of mobilizing talent in and out and having the technologies to enable that, but built around the workers themselves. Everyone should have a name. You shouldn't have 24,500 people working for you that you have no idea who they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Elizabeth, I'm curious. IBM, we've got this great big global brand in technology that's been out there. So you've been developing things for people for a long time, but you're also a consumer of workforce. And so you've been looking at blockchain for an extended period inside the organization from a product development side, but also looking at it, how do we use our workforce better? And I think you've been an early leader in coming out there. So talk to the group maybe a little bit from the perspective as a large company. Why are these ecosystems so important? Why do all of the partners working together, why is it so necessary for the business to actually be able to get an effective workforce?
That's a big conundrum. I think as in IBM, like I think most of our employees has navigated that challenge for years. 400,000 employees, right? And then I'll tell the story in the sense that about 10 years ago when we made the shift to having selling less boxes off the truck and having more work in the cloud, we really had to reskill 400,000 strong workforce, right? And in pretty high value skills and complex skills. And I think that kind of reflects as a microcosm of which is really what every organization has had to do in the past decade. Right? And I think what we found is, and if you do take the example of blockchain, about 5 years ago or 7 years ago, it was impossible to take a class on blockchain. Right? You couldn't find a person who had blockchain certification because those didn't exist. And what we found in IBM is that in the next 3 years, the half-life of skills is going to continue to decrease. So it's going to shorten, right? So every skill we thought was important last year, redundant this year. Every skill we think is important today is not available. And over 68% of the jobs, so I'm a middle schooler, right? When she gets to college, 68% of the jobs she's going to be looking for do not exist today. So that extent of the reskilling and the rapid transformation of skill requirements is a big pivot that has anchored our existence and I think everybody else's. And then when you layer on the fact that the best skills, and I mentioned this before, right, don't necessarily come from the traditional sources of skills. They don't come from necessarily from Harvard or Columbia. I'm in Columbia, so nothing against any of the but you get my drift, right? They might come from someplace else. And I think that shift within organizations to even accept that we don't need to go to the top tier, right? Or we don't need this kind of skill set. In one of my past jobs, we found this ACEs payroll specialist, and we couldn't hire them because she didn't have a degree. Today that wouldn't happen. So, because we understand that, right? So that's going to be one aspect of it. I think the other part around the skill mix and then the flexibility. So companies like Upworks, right? They're flourishing for a reason. The contingent staff component in most organizations that are open, right, is pretty significant. So we also have to think about how do we have a fungible extended workforce, using a platform, but in a much more intensive connection. And we are actually using blockchain for some of our contingent staff and management processes. We use tracking and tracing and things like that. And then we've also been working with the White House, the last administration around the digital wallet work and with the National Student Clearinghouse. I represent clearinghouses here. But yes, so we're a big partner. So to that extent, what we've tried to do as an enterprise is really look at it from what are the fundamentals of the ecosystem that need to be in place, so that everybody can participate and build on much like what you're doing here also. And I think I just want to kind of leave you with one other just thought there as you think about the skill plane. Back during World War II, some of you have heard this story, right? The United States had all these bombers that were not coming home. We had very high attrition because they were getting shot down. And so the Naval Research Academy basically was evaluating the bullet holes in the planes, and they found that planes that had, and you've been pilots, so you know the fallacy in what I'm going to say, but they found that they were really examining the bullet holes on the wings, on the body, and they came to the conclusion that those are the parts that needed to be reinforced. And then then came into the picture Arthur Wall. He was a Hungarian statistician who had escaped the Nazis in Austria, and he was in the United States. And he basically said, listen, you're looking at the bombers that came home. Think of all the bombers that didn't come home. They were the ones with the bullet holes in the engines. They were the ones with the bullet holes in the cockpits. They were the ones with the bullet holes in parts of the tail. So it totally pivoted, so it's data, it's bias. But it's also, how we're looking at the picture of what needs to be constructed for recovery and resilience. So I think that's kind of the approach we're trying to take and develop this.
Excellent. So if you're thinking about what classes your kids should be taking, there's an AI summer camp over here if you need to send people out to get something done. So let's pivot this a little bit. We've talked about the enterprise and what's there. If we're going to be providing the worker, the individual, with agency over their own information, how does that change who our customers are for a lot of these companies? If you're providing background screening services, if you're providing software in the marketplace, does this become a B2C play as opposed to a B2B play?
So, I don't know, I can share one perspective, and I've encountered some flat earthers, as I call them recently, and they do believe that it's a purely B2B play. And I think that the truth is that it's more of a B2C play, and maybe a C2C play eventually. So that's kind of my view. But I'd love to.
In Web3, we are moving towards the creators marketplace. So basically, everyone call it C2C or C2B2C, but people who own their work will be able to sell the work. It's as simple as that, and they will get all the money from future reselling their product. And starting a company with that mindset has been a great shift for me personally, because we are no longer only thinking about hiring people or buying something out of the box, but we are also partnering with creators. So that kind of partnership with them, with the expectation that not only they are selling their product, maybe a 3D design, 3D model to us once, but they will be selling it as many times as it's needed, and they will always get money for that. So that shifts the whole kind of startup mindset and the hiring mindset, which is so far away from the traditional one. So yeah, you own your IP basically, and you are able to sell it not only on one marketplace actually, as many as you can. And yeah, it's fascinating.
quote, remembering correctly, is that you can't use the containers of the past to plan and manage the future. Which is similar to a quote from Albert Einstein, which I quote all the time, which is you can't use an old map to navigate and explore a new world. And so when we ask the question, is this B2B, B2C, C2C, which I think is what we're talking about, the answer is yes. It's everyone to everyone. Now, you can hear that and say, oh, well, that's sort of a important answer, but I think relevant for this discussion is that whichever part of this market, an emerging market you're in, my advice to you, if I could give advice, is don't recognize that the walls that you placed around yourself are arbitrary walls, right? So I'll use the example of when we talk about you're in Wells, we talk about any of these senior executives looking at their workforce. Is the workforce the people that work in my company in the UK, or is it the people that work in my company in the IT department, or is it that everybody works for my company in IT, regardless of what country and what employment contract they have? Right? I think it's the latter. Right? So the question we're beginning to ask, this is one of the chapters of the book we have forthcoming, is, what does the technology landscape look like in an ecosystem world? Right? And so the question of how do we manage the employee life cycle? Do we need Workday or do we need field glass? Yes. Right? Do we need...
You don't need field glass. You need utmost. You need utmost.
Do we need Workday or do we need utmost? Exactly. But again, almost I think it's cutting across both, which is one of the things that we're looking at. It's cutting across the categories that's becoming more and more relevant. Right? And if the next round of creation is taking what we've done before and sort of rolling it forward in an incremental or a narrow way, we're not going to get there. Right? This whole category of we're calling credentialization tech, which is what we're talking about, it's a new category. Right? And one of the ways we might think about it is, in 2008, 2007, 2005, when we were selling e-commerce, right? It was a separate division. We did not sell, and what we were trying to do was very interesting. Remember selling e-commerce to store managers? Right? They're like, well, wait a minute, retail is about a store. People come in. Trucks drive up and drop off the inventory, right? And then we were trying to sell them in e-commerce, and it took us a few years to realize this isn't about the store e-commerce. This is omnichannel. Now, of course, omnichannel today is sort of obvious. Omnichannel is B2B, B2C, and C2C, right? I mean, that's the way that marketplace works, right? Whether you're on SD or whether you're working with a store that, like Bombas, I don't think Bombas, the size people have in the stores, or whether you're buying from a retailer who have figured out that their store is also a depot, is also where people can return. It's entirely changed. The original categories are really not relevant anymore. And sort of that's why I love this question, which is, where are you relative to B2B, B2C, C2C, may not be as important as what are the relevant categories. And wherever you are you looking at adjacencies, what's next, what's above you, how do you go diagonally, because those are the spaces I think that we're creating right now.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've taken a network approach. We don't think anyone sort of owns the network. We think there are actors in the network, like enterprises trying to get work done, suppliers of talent, and of course the workers themselves. I think the core ethos, if blockchain is the core tech, I think the core ethos is the talents in charge. The workers in charge of their career. That's the right mental model, particularly 25 stops on the career and a lifetime of learning. But I think that's exciting. I mean, it's an exciting time because the way you mobilize talent, the way you get things done, and I think we'll start to see companies competing on that and winning on that. In the same way that if you and I were going to start a software company today, the thought that we would go rack servers in the other room would slow us down because somebody out there would swipe a credit card and use Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, Azure, right? And so, that is that legacy thing of like, oh, I need to get something done. I'm going to hire a bunch of employees, and they're all going to sit in this room. We're going to work together. It's like we all know that sort of doesn't make sense in today's world, and that's a good thing for the worker and a good thing for the enterprise. But I think
we're totally in yet, I remember a few years ago learning from one of our tech classes, I'm sure you've got colleagues at IBM, some of you. I remember the first time I heard the expression technology debt, right? And I think we also have some version of sort of mindset debt, right? We have legacy mindsets. So although we recognize that the categories are changing, we're wired for another world, right? And that's one of the challenges. Even when you look at what business education is like, again, whether it's at Cornell or Columbia or these are great places. Our curricula are not different enough today than they probably need to be, which is very relevant for this group. Because what's important is not necessarily what's going to come out of the first 12 or 15 or 16 years of formal or informal education. It's what people are learning through their entire lives. Can we access that in a way that's dynamic? Right? One of the things we haven't talked very much enough about, I'm going to make one money comment.
It won't be the final comment.
No, which is a wonderful expression also I heard from Tom Friedman when we were talking about it. Something he was talking about, which is he was trying to combine the idea of stability and dynamism. Right? Like how do we create something that's stable but is constantly dynamic? And it sort of sounds like an oxymoron. And then Tom said, like riding a bicycle. Right? You're only stable when you're moving. Most of our systems are built to not move. They're databases, right? And we're moving from one steady state to another steady state. Again, a lot of physicists, and probably some bunch of really great physicists are out here at Cornell Tech, but it takes a lot of energy to take something at rest and move it to another position, let it rest, and then go to another one. Part of what's so exciting to me about workforce ecosystems, talent marketplaces, and the blockchain and credentialization tech that we're looking at here at Velocity Networks is it's designed to be in motion. Right? And so few of our institutions are designed to be in motion. But I'll have that.
Well, this is why I mentioned the competition point, because I think that, at some level, people aren't going to change until they have to. Right? Most of us are creatures of habit. And so we've all probably lived this over the last 2-3 years, and we've started hiring differently. We've got our own kind of staff aug software engineers now in Croatia, Poland, a couple in Ukraine, all over the world, right? And so this idea of how you mobilize, it's pretty cool, right? Yeah, we get these updates from the firm, and of all different sizes. It's anyway, but I mention it because I think this idea of trying to apply old models to current thing is exactly right, and only with a little bit of competition are you going to be forced into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just wanted to mention one other thing. We talked about the B2B, the C2C, whatever that is, right? For everyone, everything for everyone. So in my book, I talk a little bit about what I call the universal talent exchange, and I just want to put that out there because ultimately the goal, the possibility that we can achieve is a platform where people around the world can exchange their skills, right? In a codified, validated way. And I think that's something to really important, to consider, because we can be part of that ecosystem, because it can't be built by one entity. It needs 1,000 flowers blooming around the world for that kind of an ecosystem, for that network to be built. So I just wanted to mention that because I talk about the universal talent exchange and how blockchain can enable that, with digital wallets and access in many different platforms. The second thing I just wanted to mention also is, I was in conversations with one of the colonels from the U.S. Space Force, right? As I write the book, he reviewed the book. As we're moving into into extraplanetary, life and settlements, right? This is not, we've heard about James Webb's, unfolding this week, but also, there are settlements. NASA is planning settlements on the moon. Jeff, your client and my client, right? They are looking at lunar settlements. So irrespective of, how the pace at which we move, right? It's going to happen at some point. It maybe not today, maybe not in this decade. But we do need a mechanism, a way to be able to work together and collaborate in, across very large distances in a validated way. And I think that therein really lies the potential of what we can build with the universal talent exchange and with things like what we're doing with Velocity. So I just wanted to mention those two things because our reach is beyond our own bounds.
At the table over here, and I'm watching through our sessions here, thinking about we don't have an
But I'm glad you brought up NASA, because
blockchain works on Mars.
No, I know NASA does. NASA's going to take it.
But NASA as an organization, 15,000 employees, 40,000 contractors, they consider their workforce 1 million people. One of the organizations that's truly taking crowdsourcing to a completely different level, and think of having those credentials along the way. So a closing question for you guys to kind of each chime in on. Adoption is what we're all after. You know, George said, we're all here, we've recognized the importance of collaboration versus competition. We can all compete on our own means to work through things, but if we're going to get the adoption along the way, everyone needs to kind of come on board and then share those stories. So maybe one of those aha moments that you got to witness with one of your customers or someone who has kind of tapped into what's possible, looking at something in a different way, whether that's the metaverse, whether that's blockchain, whether that's the extended workforce system or an ecosystem, that caused them to see the world in a different way and to become an evangelist for change.
Can I do two?
You got it.
Okay. So these are just two recent customer interactions. So one customer said, really was fantastic. They said, well, all that hierarchical view, you'll appreciate this, Jeff, of like how, you know, I report to you and you report to Jeff and I'll report to John, and that's the way we kind of run our business. All of that is, they call it their home view. And they said, well, what we've really built now, we've built our agile view, the how we get work done view. And it's inclusive of everything you'd expect, like who's on the team. Doesn't matter if it's, you know, doesn't matter your employment category, W-2, 1099, whether you're in the office or perpetually remote. So that was kind of awesome, because I think that was the first in-practice example of a large financial service institution that had already organically built the sort of how work gets done view. And then just yesterday, I had an executive check-in with a fantastic customer, and they said, you know, picture the problem they face from credentialing. They've got 20,000 employees. They've got 20,000 extended workers, non-employees. But the difference with a non-employee population is those 20,000 are brought to them by about 800 suppliers. Right? And so today they say, okay, for the 20,000 employees, we have a background check, we have a credentialing process, we do that for our team. But those folks are around a lot longer, on average, about 2 years or longer. But the non-employees are there, brought to you by 800 staffing intermediaries, might be there 6, 12 months. And they're like, why don't we have a single way that we track credentials? And I was like, holy crap, I'm going to Velocity Foundation tomorrow. This is amazing. But you know, kidding aside, I think this idea, if you just think of like the organizational complexity, the friction in that. Like they have people that do, you know, 4 6-week background checks for a 4-week assignment. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's, I don't know, you know, I think that was an aha moment for me, because it wasn't me pitching them on that. It was the client saying, wouldn't it be great if we could just have a singular way that we can keep track of all this?
I can go next. So I think for me there were a couple of moments. The first had to do with strawberries. So IBM, you know, a big client of ours is Walmart, and Walmart had contaminated strawberries, and you know, we worked with them on the blockchain to basically trace the source. So we weren't, you know, throwing away all those great yummy strawberries. Walmart wasn't, but they were able to track, right, and trace exactly the provenance of those. So for me, I mean, it was a very, as a mom, as you know, as a professional working in the heart of blockchain, it was a very real example that kind of made me feel like, okay, you know what, this is something we can all use. We have to kind of look beyond the crypto bro stories and you know, think what else technology can do for us. Right, I think that was one thing. I think the second thing is, you know, with the work that 110 is doing, I don't know if folks, you're familiar with the work of 110, it's a wonderful organization. They are using blockchain to create digital wallets with a very targeted agenda around African Americans and getting them high-value jobs in the United States in tech. So Morris Johnson, I believe the CEO, and IBM, Deloitte, a whole lot of us partnering on it. But you know, they are actually making this real in an ecosystem fashion, working with state governments in a way that you know, we can all kind of understand and get our arms around the access to talent. So I think that's also been kind of a great example to get some of the naysayers to understand how this will really work. And I think that's the challenge, right?
We've been working with a couple of meetups and a couple of recent startup companies. So the way we think about starting our company, that might shift, change. mindset shift which Jeff was referring to earlier. We no longer even think about renting an office. We start our companies totally virtually, and that's the way we will be doing it. We are not even considering it. Yeah, we may, have a space like this to get together once in a while, but what we are building is that virtual office for virtual companies, and that's a completely different story. And the couple of meetups which I mentioned, so people used to gather together at libraries or some other spaces, in person, always in person. Of course, the pandemic changed that. And we realized that it wasn't engaging, it wasn't interesting over Zoom. It was just so boring, and people started dropping off and kind of going less and less to those gatherings. And now we're working with a few meetups to actually bring that experience into the metaverse. So you are engaged, you are immersed, you can do so much more. Just not restricting yourself to the physical world makes it so different, so exciting to be live right now.
Yes.
So I'll have one quick story, Nelly. And one of the clients we have in Code, one of our other code design clients, one was Unilever several years ago, the other was Schneider Electric. And this is on. This is on. Okay, sorry. So, well, I forgot what I said, but it was really important. No, right?
Schneider Electric.
No, I know, I'm joking. Right? I can never say it again as well as I said it a minute ago. Right? No. So, in the work that we're doing in Cloud, one of our co-design partners was Unilever. One of our co-design partners a few years ago was Schneider Electric. And Schneider Electric now has, I think, 140,000. About maybe half their 140,000 employees are on this platform. The platform is a marketplace, right? And I think it's relevant. We've talked about ecosystems. I think it's also relevant to sort of think about marketplaces. The aha for Schneider Electric was if they could create an internal marketplace, right, and then eventually expand it, which of course they're thinking about, where anybody who works in their company could find an opportunity anywhere else in the company. Now that sounds so basic, but they were shifting from a model that said we administer talent to talent moves through a marketplace where employees are looking for opportunities and project managers are trying to find people to put on their teams to do it. This is a fundamental shift, but here's the interesting point, one of the interesting points of the story. When we started with them, they did something that was very common in marketplaces, or really common in enterprises. They had a rule, which was you had to be in the company for 3 years before you could look for another job anywhere in the company. By the way, we had this rule at Deloitte too. I remember, we hired these incredible people, and we say, but you have to, the group that you join, you have to be there for a year. Okay, so what happens? 6 months into it, you get an offer from someone else, and you have two choices. Do I either stick it out where I am, wait a year, wait three years, or do I go to this other really good opportunity? Right? And so what we're seeing is the rethinking of what makes sense in terms of the norms and the rules in the organization if we're in a marketplace and an ecosystem world. Okay. By the way, now it went from 3 years to 1 year, and now it's 0. You join the company, tomorrow you can find another opportunity. It's even going to move further. In the future, you're going to make an offer to somebody and say, oh, you can join 6 months from now. But what happens if they say 3 months before they join, but Jeff, I got another job opportunity somewhere else. I don't want to come into the cyber division. I want to go in the blockchain division. Can I move my job and my project in your organization even before I join? I actually think we're going to see that happen as well, right? So it's the power of that marketplace shift, and then asking the question, do we have the management practices? Do we have the technology? Do we have the organization? Do we have the leadership practices for what's actually happening?
Excellent. Well, I encourage you guys to catch up with our panelists. Thank you very much.